Welcome to our series A3 Storyboards Tips and Tricks, Episode 4, our final episode on the topic. In Episode 3, we reviewed the goal, analysis, and countermeasures sections, providing tips for each. In this episode, we'll review the plan and follow-up sections, as well as provide some final tips before we wrap up. Plan refers to the steps that will be taken to apply the countermeasures identified. As with any plan, the actions to be taken will be listed, along with the person responsible for each action, which might not be the author. Of course, the expected schedule of the action is noted. It is also very important to provide a very clear indication of the progress that has been made to date for each action. Obviously, we are now in the do stage of PDCA. The plan section must be regularly updated to reflect progress. The author will frequently share the A3 with others in the organization to keep people informed. Beyond simply informing people regarding progress, the author also needs to share the learning that has taken place. It is in the do stage that important learning occurs as process changes are made. These must be shared. People tend to do very well putting the plan together. The real tip here that I wish to share is about the nature of the steps that are taken to apply particular countermeasures. We must always remember that a countermeasure is a hypothesis. The author and authors with whom he or she is working have a strong opinion that a countermeasure will be effective, but really no one knows until the change has been made and the effects assessed. Therefore, a spirit of experimentation should be maintained throughout the do stage. A process change should not be fully implemented until it has been proven effective. Therefore, the author and the folks he or she is working with should always be how they can try out a countermeasure in a limited and safe way. This is really a common sense tip, but a very important one. I have seen too many improvement efforts jump in the deep end of the pool, as the expression goes. The people making the changes go all in from the beginning of the do stage. This approach has often given rise to significant problems. First, people tend to resist larger scale change. Second, it is usually more difficult to make adjustments to a process change that has been fully implemented across the board. An adjustment is often necessary as a countermeasure did not work out quite as expected. Further, making a change that can have a broad impact on the process and possibly an organization can give rise to significant risk. We learn more from try-storming, as we mentioned in the last episode. We just want to do so in a safe way that minimizes risk. Finally, what is not necessary here is to lay out a very detailed plan that attempts to predict each and every step that will be taken. The reality is no one really knows what all the steps will be. There's really a lot of uncertainty on how a countermeasure will ultimately be applied and what the effects will be. Often people will lay out a very detailed plan and get a false sense of certainty. So the tip here is for the author to simply identify the upcoming steps to apply countermeasures. As they learn from taking those steps, they can determine subsequent steps. That is why it is so important that the author keeps the plan up to date and regularly shares it with others in the organization. Next, we'll discuss the follow-up section. I often see significant gaps in the follow-up section. Sometimes the section is missing altogether. People explain to me that they struggle to keep the storyboard to the prescribed A3 size sheet of paper. In the fight for quote-unquote real estate, it is the follow-up section that usually is affected and insufficiently attended to. What this can mean is that the author is not following proper PDCA practice. There is a lot going on in the follow-up section as it represents the check and act stages of PDCA. That is why it cannot be shortchanged. It is here where the results of experiments will be presented as part of the check stage. This will require additional data gathering. Probably not as much data that was collected back in the current condition section. To recall from episode 1, I mentioned that a wide data net is typically cast for the purpose of understanding various characteristics of the process. At this point, the objective is much more specific, to assess the effectiveness of a countermeasure or countermeasures. Another point is sufficient time must be given to assess any change. This requires patience from everyone involved. How much time? That is difficult to say. I can provide statistical-based guidelines that say 100 data points is ideal, while 30 is usually sufficient, but these are just guidelines. I often tell people, you'll know, but don't be too quick to judge. And checking goes beyond simple data gathering. Checking should involve go see to observe firsthand the changes in practice. Qualitative facts are just as important as the quantitative data. Quick awareness of any undesirable circumstances that arise as a result of the process change is important. Then adjustments can be made quickly in a timely manner. The author and others in the organization must accept the results of the experiment. At times this is not the case, as people allow predisposed biases to cloud their judgment. They don't accept the data that they collected. And this would not be proper practice of PDCA. Even once the effectiveness of countermeasures has been assessed, the work is not done. Problem solvers and process improvers must always remember the temporary nature of process changes. Most process changes can be quickly abandoned. So what additional steps will be taken to ensure that this does not happen? Often people tell me we updated the standard work and trained everyone. While such steps are necessary, they are insufficient to ensure proven process changes are sustained over time. What will be the process quote-unquote control plan? Ongoing process measurement can provide a timely indication of issues that may arise. Periodic close process observation is another part of a successful control plan. Of course, the concern with sustaining is much less if the countermeasure is a form of mistake-proofing device. The idea of mistake-proofing is that errors can be prevented. Now, it's not always possible to truly mistake-proof a process, but with a bit of creativity, it may be more possible than people first realize. As with all other sections of the storyboard, the author should be sharing the information in this section with others in the organization involved in the effort. There's a lot of learning taking place during the check stage and even into the act stage. That learning should be shared with others. Once the effort has been completed and the story comes to a happy ending, the storyboard will be closed out. The storyboard succinctly summarizes a lot of important learning and should not be discarded. First, I suggest sharing it with other people in the organization who have not been involved up to date. Why, you might ask? Well, it may inspire others to solve other problems or improve other processes. Or perhaps the countermeasures may have applicability to other problems or processes in the organization. The means to share storyboards should be worked out by the organization. I have seen organizations make the sharing part of a celebration activity, a recognition activity. So the tip here that I have is to have some fun with it. Next, how will the storyboards be archived? Again, they contain a lot of important information and should not be discarded. They should be archived in a way that can be easily found and referred to in the future if the need arises. To wrap up, I'd like to provide some final thoughts, some final tips on A3 storyboards. First, do not get hung up on appearance. I've seen people spend excessive time trying to make the storyboard pretty, usually trying to do so on a computer. The fact is, handwritten storyboards are just fine. Now, I always recommend authors do whatever is easiest for you. If the computer-based tools that you want to create the storyboard with are easy for you to use, then use them. But just don't be spending a lot of time making it pretty. Rather, the time should be spent on problem solving and process improvement, and on how best to convey the story, and not making the A3 look aesthetically pleasing. As I mentioned several times during this series, the storyboard template must be adapted to the story being told. There is no standard format for A3s. This sometimes surprises people when I make that statement. This is a very important tip, and that I've come across numerous organizations that have mandated that everyone use the same storyboard template. Frankly, I don't know where people get this idea. I believe it is a misguided attempt at standardization. What I do know is that it really can create trouble for the authors. Trouble that could have been avoided altogether by allowing some flexibility. A tip that really will come with experience is to know your audience. Know your readership. With practice, you will hear the same questions asked over and over again. With experience, you will learn to anticipate these questions and address them proactively in your storyboards. We mentioned a few in this series. For example, people will always ask about the source and time frame for any data presented. This should be clearly noted. Another suggestion is to spell out any acronyms that are used. Don't assume readers know their meaning. You will hear other common questions, so listen to your readers and take them into account as you develop your storyboards. It truly takes practice with the methodology to become good at it. It took me about 4 storyboards before I began to get comfortable with them, and about 6 where I became confident with their use. This is just the facts. It is a skill that must be developed over time with practice. Therefore, you must be patient with the process and yourself. Don't get frustrated to the point where you abandon the approach altogether. I always tell people when they exhibit frustration, and they always do, that it will get easier the next A3 they do, and the one after that, and the one after that. They typically look at me funny when I say that. The effectiveness of the approach is just too great to abandon. The process really does work. Not just to solve problems and improve processes and everything that involves, but to develop the problem-solving and process improvement skills and mindsets in people. And that is the ultimate goal of Lean, to develop a culture of continuous improvement which requires members of the organization to be effective problem solvers and process improvers. Storyboards are a proven way to accomplish this lofty objective. This brings episode 4 and our series to a close. To review a few key points from this episode, number 1, the plan must be kept up to date to reflect progress made to date throughout the do stage. Number 2, actions to apply countermeasures must be considered as experiments. Number 3, the effectiveness of countermeasures must be assessed during the check stage. 4, other steps must be taken to sustain proven changes. This is the act to make standard stage. They will not magically become a permanent part of the process. Additional steps must be taken. I hope that you found the information provided in this series helpful. Reflect on your past practice, if you have used the methodology in the past. Did you encounter some of the difficulties that were brought up during the series? Would the tips provided help address them as you continue to use the approach? For those of you who have yet to use A3 storyboards, you will want to give consideration to the tips presented as you begin to practice. You will be able to avoid common difficulties, as well as avoid quite a bit of frustration if you do abide by those tips. You will have a much more positive experience, which is always a good thing. With a positive experience with A3s, you'll want to do them again and again. I wish you all the best in this and all your continuous improvement endeavors. Goodbye.